Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are about to begin our off-season in 2033, although the official off-season is still a couple of weeks away. It was overall a reasonably successful season for us here in Oakland. We've made the playoffs this year for the fourth time in the past 5 seasons. So after 5 consecutive losing seasons to begin this series, we've been successful over these past 5 years as we now have 10 full seasons in the books as general manager of Oakland. Our 96-66 record was our best regular season throughout this playthrough. 796 runs scored was the second most that we've ever had, and our 622 runs allowed was the best pitching staff that we've ever put together. We did end up getting upended in the division series, losing 3-2 overall to Texas yesterday after taking 2 straight in a wild card series against Baltimore. Despite the fact that this was our winningest regular season ever, certainly can't argue that it's our best season in Oakland. The 94-win team in 2029 that won the American League West and went on to shock the Dodgers in the World Series is certainly the best result that we've had overall. But now we turn our attention to beginning to prepare for the offseason. And as we typically do at this time of year, we're going to do a deep dive into our roster and start trying to figure out who may be back with us next year and who will likely be playing somewhere else. This is definitely a statistics-heavy episode and not particularly action-packed, so if you need a sleep aid, putting this on in the background as you're trying to fall asleep may work wonders for those of you with insomnia. Before we get to the season review, though, a couple of interesting comments to our last episode when we went through the playoff series, and we'll talk through a couple of those right now. John Hunter shrewdly noticed that Jai Watterson, who we talked about, who was the starting pitcher for Baltimore in Game 2 of that wild card series that we won, was a familiar name. And although I felt like it was familiar at the time, I was having trouble placing him. Sometimes the series and the seasons and the versions of OOTP run together for me. But Watterson, of course, is a guy that we traded away less than 2 years ago to Baltimore. So John Hunter asked if we took a look at that trade in retrospect, given that Jai Watterson just was 21-8 this year, leading the American League with 21 wins and a strong 3.39 ERA. We did do a good job against him in the playoff game, and as I talked about at the time, his stuff we think is only major league average, although he's got a pretty diverse arsenal. I think it's very conceivable and probably likely that the 21 wins he had this year as a 25-year-old will be the highest number in his career. But we did trade him away a couple years ago as part of the trade where we also dealt Duncan Marston. Watterson was an international amateur free agent we spent about $1 million on as a secondary selection. Marston is a guy that we picked 4th overall in the first draft in this game in 2024. He was out of options at the point that we traded him away, and we decided that he likely wasn't going to make our major league roster and didn't want to risk losing him for nothing. So we packaged Marston and Watterson and a couple of lesser players together in this trade. You can see that Marston doesn't really seem to be an impact guy at the major league level, has spent the majority of each of the past 2 seasons in the majors, but put together an ERA of over 5 this year in 48 innings pitched over 23 games, including 5 starts. But certainly, when you think about what we got in return, Josh Teeples is a guy that's never gotten out of AAA for us. We liked bringing him on for Marston because he, even at this point, still his one option year left. But Teeples admittedly looks like a back of the bullpen, back of the rotation type of pitcher. And he's also coming off of a torn rotator cuff that cost him a good chunk of last season when he was 3-5 with an ERA of over 5 in AAA. So certainly not a trade that looks really good for us right now. Very conceivable that Jai Watterson is going to be the most productive player in that deal. Although, again, I think looking at his current and potential ratings and the fact he's going to be turning 26 years old in less than a month, conceivably we've seen peak Jai Watterson this year. But I have to admit that peak Jai Watterson is probably better than anything we will ever get from Mr. Teeples. So thanks to John Hunter for bringing that up. Also, Sam Mont wanted us to take a look at Elliot Bonello, who you may remember is a guy we almost traded for last offseason. We ended up going with the corner outfield / first baseman Cody Morton instead. Bonello, first full year in the majors this year at the age of 24 and 25 with Cleveland, hit a solid offensive year, 30 doubles, 20 homers, and 77 ribbies with a .260 average. Sounds pretty good. It all added up to only a 103 WRC plus, so a little bit above average offensively and a 1.6 WAR. Certainly wasn't a great season, but Bonello certainly was better than what we got from Morton. Looking forward with Mr. Bonello, like his personality, like that he is a versatile outfielder and a good corner outfielder and an acceptable center fielder. And thinking about our team for next year, the left-handed bat that he brings would probably be a nice thing to have, because conceivably right now the only two left-handed bats that we're pretty sure are going to be back with us are Colt Keith and Bobby Cabral. So it's not inconceivable that we might need to find another lefty hitter this offseason. Bonello will certainly be somebody that we look at. If you remember from several episodes ago, his price went up pretty significantly after that first time we looked at him and chose to go with Morton instead. So not sure whether or not we'll be able to bring him on board, but if we are looking for another lefty bat, I think somebody like Bonello would not be the worst to consider in the mix, although looking at the fact that he's pretty much fully developed in this point and he's fragile physically, and he is just a barely above average offensive player while we think pretty much at the peak of what he's going to be. Maybe he hits a few more homers if he continues to develop. I don't think he's someone we're going to overpay for, but if there's a reasonable deal to be had, particularly if we can use some arbitration-eligible players who may not be in our long-term plans, or some guys who are out of options that might not make our 26-man roster to bring him on board, a potential attempt at finally bringing Elliot Bonello on board could be in our not-too-distant future as well. So thanks to Sam Mont for reminding us about Bonello and having us spend a little time talking about him here today. And with that, it's time to begin our annual deep dive into this team, how we performed on the field in 2033, and who may be back with us next year. The 96 wins, as we talked about, was the most we've ever had here in Oakland, and we were actually still 3 games below Pythagorean expectations. We had winning months every month of the year except July, when we went 11-13. We're playing our best ball in September and October, where we were combined 20-9 in the regular season, and proceeded to go 4-3 in the postseason. But unfortunately, a 2-0 wild card win followed by a 3-2 loss in the ALDS means our season is still over. As we talked about, it was one of the best offensive seasons we've had, with these A's ranking 5th in the American League in runs scored, generally in the top half of the league in most offensive categories. Interestingly, we're up to tied for 4th in the American League in home runs, which is a shockingly high result for us given the struggles we've had hitting home runs many of the years through this playthrough. Unfortunately, one of our top home run hitters was a rental all season long, Kyle Manzardo. He's a big lefty bat that we're likely to be losing this offseason, so it's going to certainly be a struggle for us to get this team to up over 200 home runs again next year. The pitching, as it's tended to be through this playthrough, was the strength of our team. First in the American League in runs allowed, and you can see we were in the top 4 in all of the major pitching categories, except for walks, where ranking 6th, we were still an above average team. We've tried to build this shoestring budget franchise on pitching and defense over the years, and our defense was excellent this year as well, ranking 1st in the AL in defensive efficiency and 2nd in zone rating. Turning to our excellent pitching staff, the big concern is that our top 2 pitchers are both free agents. No realistic way that we can bring both back, and honestly, bringing one of them back will be a challenge, but it's still something that we're considering a bit more strongly at this point. Jackson Ferris, the lefty, who will be turning 30 in a couple of months, has been our ace most of the time he's been with us. 11-9 this year with a 3.60 ERA, over 200 strikeouts. He's been fragile the whole time we've had him, but we have had him on a pitch count, and as we always do with our pitchers, we've also had him on an aggressive tiredness hook, and he's never started fewer than 31 games for us over the 5 years that he's been with Oakland. Double-digit winner every season. Overall, a 62-41 record with a mid-3 ERA and 18.6 WAR over those 5 seasons in Oakland. So he has done a really nice job for us over the years. He also is a guy who is very popular nationally and extremely popular locally. So as we attempt to continue building up this franchise, potentially trying to bring Ferris back might be something for us to think about. Still looking for $23.2 million over 6 years. So it's going to be an expensive proposition, especially for a team like the A's, but he's likely to be the best pitcher on the market as far as starters. Well, it's either going to be him or Chase Burns. Burns is almost exactly a full year older than Mr. Ferris, and he also is headed to free agency. 14-7 for us this year, led the league in BABIP and WHIP. Very similar in terms of his demands, looking for $23.2 million, albeit only 5 years, but given that he's a year older, a very similar contract situation. Burns has been pretty good in his 3 years in Oakland, averaging almost 11 wins a season for us with an ERA of around 4. Given that he's not quite as popular and he is a year older, I think my inclination, if we go with one of these guys, is to probably go with Ferris. Gives us a younger pitcher, a lefty for the rotation, and a guy that, even though he is fragile physically, we've been able to keep healthy thus far. So you think about that, and you think about the boost we might get popularity-wise re-signing Jackson Ferris. I think if we're to bring back one of the pitchers, it probably will be Mr. Ferris. When we take a look, and I alluded to this earlier as the potential upcoming free agents, Burns and Ferris, the 2 guys on our team, are the cream of the potential free agent crop. So if we don't bring one of them back, we are likely to be looking for a replacement who is not as good as either of them on the open market, although to be fair, we'll likely be spending a lot less money on most of those potential replacement options. Turning our attention back to our current pitching staff, though, the other 3 starters likely will be back next year. We traded for Jamie DeVore last offseason. Big improvement for him moving from Atlanta to Oakland, 13-8 with a 3.11 ERA, put up a 2.7 WAR for us. He is a guy who's set to make $3.6 million in arbitration next year. Think he can be a good, solid starter for us for the next few years. Contract-wise, 8-year deal. He's looking for $18 million a year in those free agent years, about 13 plus million average over the length of the contract. Given who he is, profile-wise, and the fact that he's fragile physically, tend to think the approach with DeVore is to let him play out his arbitration seasons before potentially making a longer-term commitment. Jason DeCaro is a guy we picked up in a trade a few years earlier than DeVore, who has signed with us for the long term, coming off of a bit of an off year for him, at least in terms of the wins. 7-9 record, ERA of just over 4. He, over his now 3.5 years in Oakland, has proven to be a pretty solid major league pitcher for us with an ERA right around 4. As I mentioned, we did sign him to an extension. He's not making crazy money these next few years, but he is admittedly more of a third or fourth starter kind of guy than a top of the rotation pitcher. And Mason Miller, 500 record this year at 8-8, 4.76 ERA, I believe is the worst in his major league career, unless I'm not forgetting any worse seasons. So he finally had some injury issues this year, starting just 24 games for us. Didn't even reach 110 innings pitched. 1.6 WAR is the lowest number he's put up since 2027, which was his first full year as a major league starter for us. We've got a team option, our final team option on him for $5 million next year at age 35. He also has a no trade clause by virtue of his 10-5 rights. So have a decision with him this offseason. At $5 million with that really good stuff and the 100-mile-an-hour fastball, I tend to think we'll be inclined to bring him back, given that we're likely to be losing at least one and possibly two of our top 2 starters. And a guy who is likely to fill one of those starting roles, or possibly the fact that we might have even more than one starting role to fill, is Levi Sterling. He is one of our high school pitcher success stories at this point. Picked him in the 3rd round in the 2024 draft. He spent parts of the last few seasons in the majors with us and became a full-time major leaguer this year. Pitched 9 games for us as a starter, and also was our closer at times, saving 9 games. Overall had a 10-6 record, a 3.10 ERA, 138 ERA plus, 85 FIP minus, and a 1.6 WAR on the year. Has a really nice 4-pitch arsenal with an excellent curve, a great slider, a really good fastball, and an adequate changeup. And think that he will likely be sliding into our rotation next year. You may remember we signed him to an extension when he was pretty unproven before this year got underway, and hopefully that will end up paying off for us. Jeremy Scholl, another high school pitcher that we got in the 8th round in 2027, has become a pretty reliable bullpen arm for us this year. Over the years, led the league with 68 games pitched this year, had 16 saves. He was our closer from time to time. Struck out more than a batter per inning with a 3.70 ERA. Did give up a lot more home runs this year than he did a year ago, but you look at his rating for home runs allowed and the fact that he's a ground ball pitcher, and that's probably just a little bit of bad luck. So still think that he'll be an important arm for us, hopefully for several years to come. The lefty Henry Lillane, we may be at a crossroads with. He pitched 66 games for us, a 5-10 record with a 3.87 ERA. Struck out over 100 batters working out of the pen for us. So another nice solid relief season for the lefty. He is a guy who can also start. The issue is he's set to make about $6 million next year, which if we do intend to kind of use him again as a middle reliever, is getting pretty pricey, especially for a team like Oakland. So if Lillane has some value and might be a guy that we could include with some other players to potentially bring a left-handed bat on board, perhaps someone like Mr. Bonello, it's conceivable that we could move on from Lillane this offseason. The $6 million-ish that we'd be taking off the books potentially also would give us a little more currency to go after the likes of Ferris and or Burns. Caden Dana, righty, who we've signed to a long-term deal. Another guy who can start for us and has started for us in the past, although not this year. Probably had his best season with us, though, with a 2.84 ERA over 79 and a third innings pitched. Put up a WAR of close to 1, working 79 and a third innings out of the bullpen. Envision him again in a middle relief role for us next year, and if we do have some injury issues or we're unable to bring back either Mr. Ferris or Mr. Burns, Dana could certainly be competing for a spot in the rotation as well. R.J. Cope, third-round pick in 2026, another guy who after a long trip through the minors finally became a full-time major leaguer for us this year. ERA of just under 4 with 69 dude strikeouts in 56 and a third innings pitched. I think that he could be an important arm in the bullpen for us going forward. Really like his stuff, although the walks are always likely to be an issue. He issued 28 of them this year in 56 and two-thirds innings. We did have him as a potential two-way player this year. He only got 2 at-bats, did drive in a run, and struck out once, so was pretty eventful in those 2 at-bats. He's a guy that was a two-way player coming up through our system. Just don't think that the contact combined with the eye is really good enough at the major league level. But he can hit the ball out of the park on occasion, so probably will maintain him as a two-way player, but not expecting him to get more than a handful of opportunities at the plate in any given season unless our offense ends up a lot weaker than we hope it will be. Ian Outh, a pitcher that we traded for last offseason, had a pretty solid year for us. 2.74 ERA working out of the bullpen, put up a WAR of 0.7. He is another guy who is making the major league minimum at least for the next year or two, and think he can be a pretty useful right-handed middle reliever or setup man for us going forward. Thinking about a long-term contract with him, start thinking about 8 years, buying in those free agent years. $25.2 million total over 8 years doesn't seem unreasonable. I think I'd try to get him maybe for a little bit less money than this, certainly, and certainly some team options at the end of it. But with the performance that Whistler Outh put up for us and the fact that he's been able to effectively use that very effective fastball thus far, might be a guy we consider signing to an extension to bolster our relief core for the next several years. Last but not least, the lefty Chris Carl, an 11th round pick in 2027, made his major league debut for us this year and pitched pretty well with a 2.64 ERA over 30 and two-thirds innings pitched. Certainly would expect Mr. Carl to be in the mix to be a lefty arm out of our bullpen again next year. So when we think about this team, we're going to be losing possibly 2 and certainly one of our top 2 starters. But other than that, really the only likely departure is probably Henry Lillane. And we've got some other prospects coming up who aren't too far away. Some other guys who pitched on the major league roster in September for us. So probably not going to have to go too crazy trying to bolster the bullpen this offseason. And if we end up deciding to make an offer for Jackson Ferris, we may not really need to do much at all to the pitching staff this offseason. Turning our attention now to our everyday players, and this is an area where we expect there to be some more turnover and probably some more significant gaps that we're going to need to try to fill on a shoestring budget this offseason. At catcher, we reunited with our longtime catcher Drake Baldwin just before the trade deadline, and he was very productive for us. Put up a 140 WRC plus in just over 100 at-bats, 7 homers, and 16 ribbies. He is still looking for pretty significant money, $8.5 million a year over 3 years, given that he'll be 33 before the season gets underway and he's fragile physically. The reunion this year was probably a temporary one. Jaden Boakai, who was our starter until we reunited with Baldwin, ended up struggling offensively, hit just 204 with 9 homers and 324 at-bats, and was overall a replacement level player as his brutal offense with a 58 WRC plus was almost perfectly offset by the really good defense he brings behind the plate. Given that he's still making the major league minimum and he doesn't have anything left to prove in AAA, we would expect that Boakai will be back in the mix for one of our catcher spots last year. In a perfect world, we'd love him to be the backup, but it's very conceivable that he could be the starter coming out of spring training. And happy 25th birthday, Jaden. Turning to our infielders, we mentioned that Kyle Manzardo likely to be one and done with us. We made a trade for him with Cleveland last offseason, got them to keep most of the final year of his contract. Hit 264 for us with 23 homers and 92 ribbies in less than 500 at-bats. Put up a 126 WRC plus for us. He has been a very productive offensive player over the course of his major league career, closing in on 300 home runs and 1,000 ribbies, which he'll likely get over the next year and a half with somebody. Probably not going to be with us. He's looking for $21 million a year over 5 years. So Manzardo, as well as Ferris and Burns, are all looking for similar-ish money and similar amounts of years. We can realistically only sign one of the three, and if we do sign one of the three, that's going to be our most significant move for this entire offseason, just based on the money we expect to have. I guess it's conceivable maybe we get a $20 million bump in the budget from Mr. Fisher, but actually it's not conceivable that we get a $20 million bump from Mr. Fisher. I guess more accurately, it's possible in some world that we're going to get a huge bump in the budget, but I'm not expecting that. And operating at a similar-ish budget to last season, we can only bring back at best one of the three out of Ferris, Burns, and Manzardo. And at this point, I think I'm leaning towards the youngest of the three, Mr. Ferris, to come back. Manzardo, like Ferris, is an extremely popular player, especially locally, so it will hurt a little bit in terms of fan interest when he likely leaves us this offseason. But feel like although the loss of that left-handed bat and the likely loss of the left-handed bat of Baldwin is going to hurt us a little bit offensively, can probably find a more cost-effective option than Manzardo is a corner outfield first base / DH type. We will have Brian Ramos back, brought him back again as a rental this year, and got Houston to pick up a good chunk of not just this year's contract, but also next year's contract. He was less effective for us as a rental this year than he was a year ago, but he actually was able to play with us more often. 8 home runs and 34 ribbies and 226 at-bats. Would expect that he will be in the mix to be a first base / DH type for us again next year. Kevin Stubblefield, in a similar situation, is a right-handed first base slash DH type. Split the year between AAA and the majors. Ended up playing a bit better after he was demoted. Finished the year with a 227 average and 15 homers and 348 at-bats. 94 WRC plus, certainly not what we're looking for from an offensive-oriented player. But looking at his speed, his contact, his gap power, and his power ratings, I think that over time at the major league level, he probably should at least produce at the 105 WRC plus that he has over his first 2 years in the majors, and hopefully will be a bit better than that. Kind of crazy that over each of his first 2 years, he's played exactly 92 games, started exactly 87 games, and had exactly 348 at-bats. But you can see that the overall results were much better in his rookie season than they were this past year, and hopefully he'll start migrating back towards that 116 WRC plus that he put up for us as a rookie. Back to the infielders, and now turning to some middle infield types. Sergio Estrada had a pretty solid rookie year for us. The batting average was just 225, but he did have 34 doubles, 6 triples, and 15 homers as a good, solid defensive second baseman. 87 WRC plus, but still put up a 2.4 WAR on the year. He'll be making the minimum next year and will certainly be back with us, likely as a starting second baseman. Would love it if we could find a scenario where he was a utility infielder for us, because that would mean that we'd have even more talent on the team, but I don't think that it's realistic. Colt Keith will be back with us as a third baseman next year. Bringing him back was our big move last offseason, and he had a bit of a bounce back year, raised the batting average 7 points, hit 7 more home runs, 9 more ribbies than a year earlier, and upped his WRC plus 11 points to 125, and put up almost 2 more WAR this year than he did a year ago. He is likely to be key bat in the middle of our lineup for as long as he is healthy and with the team. He now, with exactly 10 years of Major League service time and exactly 5 years of service time with Oakland, will officially be a 10-5 guy this offseason, so he will have rights to decline any potential trade. As long as he remains healthy and productive, though, probably not going to be trading him anytime soon. He has had over 30 home runs every year that he's been in Oakland, well over 100 ribbies in 4 of those 5 seasons, and you can see he's got 575 total ribbies in 5 years with Oakland, so he has been an extremely important part of this improved Oakland offense. We've got some interesting decisions for this offseason with the next couple guys that we're going to talk about. Justin LeBron, picked him up in a trade with the Yankees a few years ago. He has been a solid utility infielder for us, starting against left-handed pitching, playing occasionally against right-handed pitching for the last few years. Hit 231 this year with an 87 WRC plus, so a good, solid utility infielder, can play a lot of positions competently, good in the clubhouse. Not the greatest hitter in the world, but a useful guy, particularly for a team like Oakland to have on the roster. Set to make around $4.5 million this upcoming year in arbitration, though, and just not sure if the value is going to be there for us. So he's a guy that we could look to move on from this offseason, particularly if he has some value in a trade. Maui Ahuna is a similar-ish situation. Brought him on this year with a 3-year deal, but only 1 year guaranteed. So we've got a team option for $7 million for him next year. He ended up putting a 2.2 WAR for us, as his really good defense at shortstop was offset by a bat that we figured would not be great, given that our former shortstop Brian Rincon put up a 2.6 WAR while making over $10 million for the Dodgers. Think that having Ahuna with us for $6 million worked out just fine. Not a dynamic offensive player, not that we were expecting it. The issue is whether we want to bring Ahuna back as our shortstop next year for $7 million, or perhaps turn the position over to Andy Toribio. He doesn't have the same type of range or error rating as Ahuna, but 65 is still pretty solid. And we think Toribio is going to bring a better bat to the position and also some durability. He had a monster year for us in AAA, and he produced pretty well when we brought him up in September, hitting 286, albeit in only 14 at-bats for us. But still put up a 145 WRC plus, so he certainly was not intimidated by Major League pitching in a small sample size. A guy who obviously will be making the Major League minimum for the next couple of years. Does have 2 option years left if we decided to send him down, but given the money that he is expected to make and his initial solid introduction in terms of his bat and the fact that his defense isn't that far behind Ahuna's, although it's admittedly worse, I think that right now I'm leaning towards moving on from Ahuna. If someone will pay up for him in a trade before we have to exercise the option and we can get some value back, that would be great. One concern about moving on from Ahuna is what we've talked about with Baldwin and Manzardo, though. It's moving another left-handed hitter out of our lineup and essentially leaving us with just Colt Keith and Bobby Cabral as lefties on the roster who will be in the starting lineup next season. Last but not least, we will turn to our outfielders. Jake Ortega, who we picked 3rd overall in 2029 out of Oregon State, has become a very good Major League player. Won the Rookie of the Year a year ago. The batting average this year dipped to 289. The doubles fell to 42. The homers fell to 15. But he still scored over 100 runs. He tripled his number of triples from 2 to 6. And he more than doubled his number of stolen bases from 13 to 29. So he ended up putting up a 133 WRC plus for us with a 5.3 WAR. Named to his first All-Star team this year, and he was the MVP of that Wild Card Series victory over Baltimore. He's fragile physically. We've been playing him primarily in left, although he does play center field for us against left-handed pitching. Signed him to what we think will be a very reasonable contract if he keeps performing at this level. So the only hope with Mr. Ortega is that he remains healthy and well, given that fragility. And 26 years old, this next upcoming offseason may be our last and most realistic attempt to put him through the development lab maybe one final time, see if we can realize those last 5 points of potential contact and BABIP that our scout thinks are out there for him to achieve. Luis Taveras is a respectable bat for us. Spent the entire year in the majors with us, but just 174 at-bats. Started only against left-handed pitching for us. Did have 10 homers and 30 ribbies to put up a 122 WRC plus for us. So he is a pretty useful bat against left-handed pitching, and he's not an embarrassment against right-handed pitching, but certainly for a corner outfielder against right-handed pitching, hopefully we can find a better alternative for next year, particularly if we add a different left-handed bat who can maybe play a corner outfield spot for us. Certainly envision Taveras being in the mix to be on the roster as a 4th or 5th outfielder for us again next season. Spot is not guaranteed, but at this point would think he'll more likely be on the roster than not. Our main center fielder against right-handed pitching is Luis Lara, who had a bit of a bounce back year this year, improved his WRC plus from 76 to 91, doubled his WAR from 1.4 to 2.8, and more than doubled his steals to 31 from 14. 33 doubles on the year for Mr. Lara, still a very good defensive center fielder. He's a guy that we signed to a probably somewhat risky contract at the time, given that he was very unproven when we signed him, but has turned out to be a really nice bargain for us, and particularly with Ortega now playing center field against left-handed pitching, and Lara getting some regular days off against lefties. He's been able to largely remain healthy despite his fragility. Bobby Cabral, left-handed hitter, is the top slugger on our team, but he doesn't bring much to the table besides the slugging ability. 212 batting average with 241 strikeouts, not numbers that either we or Cabral are particularly proud of. But the 42 homers and the 95 ribbies are both very solid numbers. Second straight year he's led the team in homers, 110 WRC plus for a second consecutive season, and a 1.3 WAR for a second consecutive season. Certainly would love it if he could become more of a 2.5, 3 WAR kind of guy, but unless he cuts back on the strikeouts and can get the batting average up 30 or 40 points into the mid-200s, probably unlikely that he's ever going to be that kind of guy, and he is what he is. He's at least a home run threat for us, who is a pretty useful player for the amount of money he made this year. The contract is going to start creeping up over the next several seasons. Might be at some point in the future a time where we decide to move on from Burner Cabral, but particularly right now, where Cabral and Keith are likely the only two left-handed hitters who we're confident will be back with us next year, probably not the time to think about moving on from Cabral quite yet, given the dearth of lefties in our lineup. And with the annual review of our major league talent and some preliminary thoughts about what we may do this offseason, at least discussed at a very high level, before we move on to our annual farm system review, we'll play through the league championship series. If you've got any thoughts on what you would do with some of the free agent options and arbitration options that we've talked about, always helpful for me to get that feedback from viewers in the comments section to this episode. And the 2033 World Series will feature the best team in baseball, the Texas Rangers, who after eliminating us in the ALDS, took out the Royals 4-1 in the ALCS. They'll be facing a wild card team from the National League, as the Phillies, an 86-win wild card season for them, but they've taken out the top two seeds in the National League in the past two rounds. They took out the Mets in 4 games, and now they've taken out the Rockies in 6 to set up a Texas Rangers versus Philadelphia Phillies World Series. And before we find out who wins the World Series, we'll spend a little bit of time talking through our farm system. We're certainly middle of the pack, ranking 18th out of the 30 teams right now. Only one top 50 prospect, and that's the right fielder Arturo Uresti, international free agent signing from about 3.5 years ago at this point. He was really good in the DSL when he started the season down there, which would have been his 3rd full season in the DSL. But we then promoted him up to our rookie league team in Arizona to face a higher level of competition. Only hit a .184 at that level. Still looking at his profile, think that he can become a very useful major league hitter with that potentially excellent power with a really good batting eye. Still has a lot of work to get there. Hopefully, he'll have a more effective year next season. He'll be 21 early next year based on how he performed and based on how his ratings look for the ACL. He probably will start next year in rookie ball, but would love to get him up to the California League before the end of the year and see how he can do in A ball as a 21-year-old next year. We've got two other top 100 prospects. Shiloh Solis, who we picked 10th overall in 2031, had a really rough year in rookie ball for us this year. Hit just a $185. Did have 13 homers, but he has not really improved over his 2.5 years in organized baseball. Looking at his ratings at this point, I think we're just going to move him up to A-ball next year. It seems to me that based on my anecdotal experience, sometimes guys just never really produce at that rookie level. But with 2.5 years already spent in rookie ball and the fact that he'll be 21 before next season starts, I think it likely makes sense to test the number 59 prospect in baseball against A-level competition next season. Bertrand Albrighton, a familiar name. He was an international free agent signing from the second IAFA class in 2026 and viewed as the number 89 prospect in baseball. It hasn't been a smooth development curve for Albrighton by any stretch of the imagination. He was pretty productive in AA this year and then in a small sample size in his first foray into AAA. Had a really nice year for us, 315 average with 21 doubles and 6 homers and 184 at-bats. Had a 117 WRC+. He can play multiple positions in the infield. If he develops the home run power that we think he could, a combination of above-average contact and above-average home run power should play reasonably well in the majors. I don't think he's ever going to be a superstar. The issue with Albrighton, or the issues with Albrighton at this point, are that he's fragile physically, which he's always been, but he also just completed his last option year. So Albrighton is a guy that we're either going to need to devote a spot on the 26-man roster to next year, or perhaps consider finally moving on from in trade before next season. Would love to give him a chance at a major league level. He's a homegrown guy who, as I said, if he fully develops his contact and his home run power, could be a useful bat for us, particularly against left-handed pitching. Also has a great personality, potentially a very important guy in the clubhouse with that captain personality and high leadership, loyalty, adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence. But realistically, is he as good at this point at Brian Ramos or Kevin Stubblefield? He's probably not quite good at either of those guys. He can play a more competent second or third, certainly than Stubblefield, and arguably compared to Ramos. But with those two guys likely locked into roster spots, the question is whether you can have a utility infielder with the defensive limitations of Albrighton on the team or not. And with that 30 outfield range and a poor arm, trying to turn him into a corner outfielder is just not realistic in my view. So big decision with Bertrand this coming offseason. And I guess technically we do have a third top 100 prospect as Alejandro Landin ranks 100th. Actually, he's a fourth top 100 prospect if I could do some simple math, but a third guy in that 50 to 100 range was what I was thinking in my mind, although I did not say it clearly at all. Landin, an IAFA signing from 2027, pretty meteoric rise through the organization this year. very good years in high A and double A for us, where he combined for 23 homers. Struggled a bit in triple A, hitting 217 in 92 at-bats, but he did still have 6 homers at that level. Another guy with a really good personality. Think he is certainly better defensively than the likes of Al Brighton. And honestly, his bat at this point is probably a little further along than Mr. Al Brighton. Landine, fortunately, does have one option year left, but certainly a guy that we would expect to see in the majors at some point next year. And you can certainly construct a scenario where he could be on the 26-man roster on opening day. And although we only have those 4 top 100 prospects and only 1 top 50 prospect, and obviously we're middle of the pack in terms of the overall rankings, we do have 8 players, or actually 7 players, ranked between 101 and 200. So some other guys who could certainly help us. Amari Raphael, who we picked 22nd overall out of Piedmont College a year and a half ago, struggled in A-ball, or more accurately high A-ball, as we talked about in previous episodes. Still promoted him to double A anyways, and he was actually a lot better against the better competition, going 7-0 with a 4.25 ERA in 53 innings at the double A level. The hope is that at some point next year, Raphael could be helping us at the major league level. The question is whether he'll start the year out in double A with Midland, or whether we'll promote him to triple A to start the season. But even if he starts the year in double A, if things proceed as we hope they would think that a September call-up next year for Amari Raphael could certainly be in the mix. Luis Coronado, ranked as the 113th prospect in baseball. He was our second-round pick in 2031. Started the year in rookie ball. Wasn't particularly effective there, but as we've talked about sometimes, we think you just got to promote a guy to A-ball and see how he can do against the better competition, and it seems like that really jump-started Coronado's development. Hit 275 with 16 homers and 40 ribbies in 229 at-bats for single-A Stockton, 164 WRC plus and a 3.5 WAR. He could still become a pretty useful infielder for us. Solid defensively, not great, but could be a very good second or third baseman. I'll have to get him trained up at second base over time. He already knows how to play third and short pretty well. If his bat fully develops, think that he could be a pretty interesting player for us for the future. Matt Perry, our old friend, was a third-round pick in 2032. He was 1-6 with a 5.15 ERA this year in rookie ball for us. His first full season as a professional kind of was worse than he was when he played half a season with us after being drafted. Still think his stuff could be potentially really interesting, but he's got a lot of work to do in terms of not walking batters and keeping the ball within the fences. Jorge Orellana, a international free agent signing from earlier this year, hasn't made his professional debut yet. The 17-year-old will likely be doing that in the DSL this upcoming year. Sergio Palomares, another former international free agent signing from back in 2029, spent a second consecutive full year in A-ball and was not particularly productive. The batting average was .202, 18 doubles and 8 homers and 397 at-bats. We're certainly not going to have him repeat A-ball for a third straight year. We'll likely start him out in the Midwest League and see how he can do against high A competition. Would hope that at some point next year he can move up to double A. When we look at his potential ratings, still thinks like he could be a pretty interesting contact hitter for us with excellent speed and contact gap power and I ratings that could all be well above average if he meets his full potential. But realizing that potential has not happened to the extent we would have hoped thus far in his professional career. The last two top 200 prospects we have are both pitchers who could be helping us soon. Josh Mangano, second round pick back in 2028. Another high school pitcher that has progressed over time throughout our organization. Combined for a 17-6 record between AA and AAA last year, mid-3s ERA in AA, mid-4s in AAA, combined 5.1 WAR, so a pretty good season for him. Still needs to work on his control and still needs to develop that third pitch, the changeup, but a lot to like about him. He's durable, he's got a lot of good personality traits, pretty decent stamina. Throws in the mid to high 90s with extreme ground ball tendencies. Still think Mangano could be a important major league pitcher for us. Hopefully a potential call up at some point next year. A guy who was called up this year is Sam Bailey. We picked him out of UNLV, a somewhat rare college pitcher for us, the fourth round in 2030. He was 8-4 with a sub-3 ERA as a starter in AAA Las Vegas this year, and then put up a 2.86 ERA over 28 and a third innings in the majors. He is a lefty arm, another reason why we may end up deciding to move on from the lefty pitcher Henry Lillane is that Bailey, a pretty similar profile, certainly has the stamina and the arsenal to be either a starter or a reliever. Don't think he's necessarily going to excel at either role, but Bailey at this point still has 3 option years left, is making the major league minimum. So with Lillane set up for a $6 million-ish payroll next year, having a lefty like Bailey on the team instead of him may be a logical move for us. Couple other guys that we wanted to check in on. Byron Brain, a international free agent signing at catcher back in 2029. He could be in the mix to be a major league catcher for us next year. Probably not the ideal scenario. He's only average defensively. What we do like about him is, though, he's a left-handed hitter, and although his splits are pretty even right now, does have the ability to hit for some power against both left and right-handed pitching while also drawing some walks. The question with him is certainly his ability to make contact and avoid strikeouts, but had a monster year for us this year with a combined 56 home runs and 128 ribbies between AA and AAA. I think in a perfect world, we'll give him next year in AAA, but it's not inconceivable that him and Boakai could be our catcher tandem next year if we're not able to find some more interesting options in the trade or free agent markets. We've already talked about Andy Toribio, who will likely be competing to potentially be our starting shortstop next year. Bob Day, another guy who could be in the mix to be a 4th or 5th outfielder / utility infielder for us next year. Had a monster season with 39 homers and a .318 batting average for us in AAA. Was 2 for 4 in a very small sample size at the major league level, but also drew 3 walks in those 2 games that he played. So a ridiculous 261 WRC plus. Issue is he's another right-handed hitter, and as we've talked about, between Bob Day, Bertrand Albrighton, Brian Ramos, Kevin Stubblefield, we've got a lot of these kind of corner infield, corner outfield types who are right-handed hitters. Day still has 2 option years left. Could be on the major league roster, could be in AAA, could be traded away for some more help. unclear exactly what his future holds, but still a prospect in our system that has some potential to be helping us down the line. And before we find out who wins the World Series this year and whether we actually have a job next season and what our budget might look like if we do have a job, I figure we'll do a very quick early preview of the 10 players who we brought into our first international amateur free agent camp. 3 pitchers. Juan Trejo is the likely top pitching prospect, some really good personality traits, and a potential 3-pitch arsenal if all works out. Jorge Aponte may end up being more of a reliever. Certainly don't see him having a starting pitcher's arsenal at this point in his potential development. Alejandro Espinoza, don't ever expect him to have a starting pitcher's arsenal, although arguably he may, as a lefty, end up as a potentially better reliever prospect than Mr. Aponte. Don't know that we'll be bringing all of them back to our next camp, but wanted to at least get a closer look at the highest ceiling prospects according to our scout. Some real interesting hitting prospects in this year's class, some with some more negative personality traits than we would normally like to bring into our organization, but figured we'd just bring in the top guys according to our scout this time around. Jesus Aguilar, the monster, looks like he could be a very interesting hitting prospect with good outfield range and decent speed, also durable, like the way that Monster looks. Alvaro Cepeda, one of the negative personality guys that we talked about, but 70 outfield range with potentially 70 contact and 75 home run power is certainly the type of profile that would make me consider bringing someone with some personality defects into the organization. Juan Marte, high greed, but other than that, a decent prospect as far as his personality. Don't love him defensively, but 80 power with a 75 eye, if he fully developed, make up for a lot of defensive shortcomings. Another third baseman prospect, Alejandro Carrillo, another glove that we don't love, but a bat that looks very well balanced with potentially really good home run power. Domingo Colato, a center fielder out of Colombia. Not the smartest man in the world, but another guy who does seem to know how to hit a ball over a fence. He also, with the Swamp Fox nickname, I believe that was Alvin Dark's nickname. I'll have to check on this offline because Alvin Dark was well before my time, but I feel like he may have also been called the Swamp Fox, so it's possible that there is recycling of nicknames now going on given the long history of baseball. Third baseman, Ramiro Reynoso, a bit more range than the other third baseman we've talked about, although not quite the same arm. Better contact hitter, but a little less home run power than some of the other prospects as well. And then center fielder Luis Cuellar is our kind of prospect. Really like the personality. Definitely more of a corner outfielder and probably realistically a left fielder. 6'3", he could also play first base. Clearly could be a DH, but with potential for 75 home run power, the left-handed hitter could ultimately work out as a potential DH down the line. So we'll be spending a lot more time in camp over the next few months with some of these prospects. Going to be doing a lot more scouting as well, but wanted to at least give an early preview of some of the guys that we may end up pursuing when the IAFA signing period opens up in about 3 months. And with that, it's World Series time. Will the 105-win Texas Rangers prove to be a team of destiny this year, or can the Phillies score another playoff upset and end the Rangers' hopes? And the Texas Rangers proved to be a team of destiny this year. They took out the Phillies in the World Series in 6 games. So although our season ended way back in the ALDS, we will take some pride in the fact that we were the only team that Texas faced in the playoffs this year that pushed them to an elimination game. Unfortunately, they did beat us 2-1 in Game 5 of that ALDS, but we gave them a better series than either the Royals or the Phillies did, and the Texas Rangers are your 2033 World Series champions. And with that, it's time to turn our attention to the offseason. As we noted earlier, a couple of option year decisions ahead of us, probably leaning towards moving on from Maui Ahuna, leaning towards bringing back Mason Miller for a potential final year in Oakland. We've had some personnel leave at the minor league level, and at the major league level, our pitching coach, Brian Conger, is moving on. We let his contract expire. He's obviously been very good for us, excellent at teaching pitching, good at development and mechanics, but we've got some excellent pitching coaches throughout our minor league organization who are threatening to leave if they don't get promoted. So conceivable that we're going to have several promotions of minor leaguers to ultimately fill that spot. Or if there's a great option at the major league level that we could just hire and bring on board, that's something to consider as well. Development facilities are open. We'll talk a lot about that in our next episode. We can see here that we've gotten a contract extension, which is good to know. We'll take a look at our season goals, which I think we did pretty well in before we find out whether we've got a lame duck 1-year contract or a little more job security. Mr. Fisher thrilled that we were able to get the team into the playoffs. Content with what Estrada has done for us in second base. Likes the improvement that we got in stolen bases. We've executed our attendance goal already, making some progress in improving our track record. Still struggling with fan interest. That's been a struggle with this Oakland A's franchise, particularly with the hit that we took very early in this playthrough to our fan loyalty, which remains minimal. He's good with our performance in accomplishing our goals, considering on and off field success. He's overall happy with us. He wants us to sign Jackson Ferris. We had been leaning that way anyways, but that may help us make him happy. Could also help in increasing fan interest for us. He wants us to build a dynasty in the next 5 seasons. I intentionally didn't look when I recently flipped to the budget screen as what our budget was next year. I'm sure some of you did, but that's the reason why 30 seconds a minute ago to look at the minimal fan loyalty. I just had forgotten how it was characterized. I didn't look up to see what the budget next year is, which I know some of you already know from having looked at that screen. 168 million. So I think that's a small bump from where we were this past year. I think we were at 164. So I guess that's a little bit of progress. Into the owner screen where it's easier to see. Yeah, we got a 4 million bump from 164 to 168. So better than we were a year ago. Wants us to extend Jackson Ferris, and that's really our only goal for this upcoming season. Although we still need to win a championship in the next 2 years, continue improving, or more accurately, make some material improvements in fan interest. I think we're starting to make some progress with our draftees, which I expect will continue going forward. Top 6 farm system may be a challenge, and also wants us to build a dynasty. So we've got some interesting work that we need to do. He's given us a 4-year extension at $1.1 million a year, so that is definitely the biggest vote of confidence that we've ever gotten from Mr. Fisher. When we look at our history, our last 2 contracts were a 1-year lame duck extension at $550,000 for 2031, followed by a 2-year deal at $8 million per that we just finished. So 4 years at $1.1 million a year, definitely a step in the right direction. When all was said and done, our game score this year, the 3rd best we've ever had, but still well off that great season we had when we actually won the World Series in 2029. But hopefully we've set ourselves up for a potential opportunity to win another World Series over these next 4 years, now that we've got the longest extension of our career. Still going to be operating next year with the lowest budget in baseball. At some point, would hope if that's not the case, that would definitely mean some material progress in Oakland. Still hoping at some point, particularly given the fact that we are now a playoff team in 4 out of 5 years, that fan loyalty will tick up a bit. I think that would ultimately help us in fan interest as well. As we think about this offseason, take another quick look at the potential free agent class. I'm guessing it's not going to be materially different than we talked about. We'll do the pitchers first because actually we hadn't talked about the hitters before. And it does still look like Burns and Ferris are the top 2 starters on the market. We'll see what Ferris is looking for right now. Still says $23.2 million over 6 years. I think I'm inclined to try to bring him back. We've got, with the extra $4 million, just about enough money to bring him on board next year. But again, we could be moving on from Ahuna at $7 million. We could be moving on from Lalane at $6 million arbitration number. Justin LeBron in the mid-4s for arbitration. So there's definitely opportunities for us to get this contract situation in a much more reasonable spot than it looks right now to be able to afford Ferris. So I think I'm certainly leaning towards making an offer to him. As we look at, and for those of you who care, I will show you the pitcher ratings. So we've got those in front of us for the upcoming free agents. Pretty confident that I'm going to try to bring Ferris back, but we'll take a look at the free agent batters quickly. Some pretty interesting players out there. Dale Amador is wrecked physically, but second baseman who can hit and field pretty well, has hit over 300 for at least 3 years in a row. Exactly 3 years in a row, but hit over 300 in 4 of the last 5 years, winning a couple of batting titles in Colorado. He's pretty interesting. Kevin Alcantara, Nacho Alvarez Jr., Christian Serta, Cam Collier, R. Kyle Manzardo, and Blake Mitchell are the other top free agent prizes as far as everyday players. Drake Baldwin also on the list. Spencer Torkelson, who we've talked about in the past. Pablo Aliendo, former catcher in our organization. Miguel Amaya, who we've had in the minors at times over the years. Drew Gilbert is a guy that we looked at a few times in the trade market, was always very expensive. He's now wrecked physically and still likely looking for more than we can afford to pay him, but that could be a left-handed corner outfield bat that would be useful, given that he's basically been just a bit above league average over the last few years. Would hope we can find someone who's a little younger and less injury prone, although at least the price tag for Gilbert is more reasonable than when he's been making eight figures over the past several seasons. So we are going to have a lot of interesting decisions to make this offseason. I am going to proactively try to bring Ferris back right now, taking a quick look at arbitration. Likely will submit qualifying offers to both Burns and Manzardo. If either of them decides to accept, we'll do what we need to do to bring them back on a one-year deal. At those kind of numbers, I'd be happy to have either of them back. But we are going to see if we can put a package together that's a bit less money than Mr. Ferris is looking for right now, with perhaps a little more optionality at the end of it for us. And as we've talked about, Ferris has been looking at 6 years at $23.2 million a year. Our initial offer to him is going to be 5 years at an average of $20 million a season, with team options for years 4 and 5 at the bigger numbers. 46% of the total dollars in the 5-year contract are in those 2 team option years. I don't think this is going to be quite attractive enough to get Mr. Ferris thinking about it seriously, but we've got to start somewhere. And I guess I had the team options not set up quite properly, unfortunately, or at least the buyouts for those team options. Yeah, he's still looking for the full 6 years, and he's still looking for the full money. So I'm probably going to have to be a little more aggressive in terms of the money that we're offering to Mr. Ferris. And we're still trying to include the team options, which I don't think Ferris is going to like, but it's back to the 6 years that he was looking for, and at $22 million an average over those 6 years, and a bit more balance between front loading and back loading than what we had initially offered him in terms of that 5-year contract. So another extra year of fully guaranteed money for him at bigger numbers over these first 4 seasons than he was getting in the previous contract offer we made to him. Certainly should be more attractive than the past one. I tend to think, given that he's going to be one of the top free agents on the market this year, if we let him hit the market, he's probably going to be pretty insistent that he doesn't want the team options, but we'll ask for a response. And he's actually willing to come down to 5 years, but he seems pretty insistent that he doesn't want those team options in this contract. So we'll find out what type of value he really puts on those team options, because we've taken them out of the contract, but we've taken the years down to 5, which he was willing to do. But we've also taken the average annual value down to $20.5 million, and he's been pretty insistent on that $23.2 million number through the first couple rounds of negotiations. My hope is that he might be a little willing to come down on the dollars since we're not including the team options anymore. And he is willing to come down a little, but not as much as we had hoped. And looking at his less effusive smile here, this could be our last opportunity to engage with him and hopefully get a deal that he will take to his family for strong consideration. And he says he's looking for $22.8 million a year over 5 years. We're offering him an average of $22 million over those 5 years. He's willing to have us submit that offer to him. So more money than we were hoping, less optionality for us than we were hoping, but only 5 years rather than 6. So that's actually probably a small victory for us. It'll be a $20 million outlay this upcoming year, which is a big contract for these Oakland A's, but Ferris looks like he's the best starter on the market. He is proven in Oakland. He's popular with our fans, and the owner would like us to sign him. So we are going to submit that 5-year, $110 million offer to Jackson Ferris. even with the other potential levers that we could press as far as some of the trades that we talked about, some of the arbitration eligible players, the decision on Maui Ahuna. We likely will not be making any real significant moves this offseason if we end up signing Ferris. But as the offseason gets underway, bringing Mr. Ferris back is our primary goal. Probably will ultimately sim ahead a few days between now and the next episode as I spend a lot of time offline investigating potential trades, thinking about some of those decisions that we have to make. If you've got thoughts on what you would do or would not do, always helpful for me to hear them in the comments section. And until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.